Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Emotional and physical aggression are some of the most pressing issues in relationships. Yet, people often say that the bond between a victim and their tormentor can be like a vicious cycle, where eventually they can't imagine life without each other. There's a widespread misconception that an aggressor targets only the weak and unsure, someone easy to break and control. In reality, that's far from the truth. These tormentors seek out vibrant, successful individuals. It makes their acts of cruelty and control feel more satisfying to them. The story of a young British woman named Angel Lynn in 2020 shocked the entire United Kingdom. For a long time, she was stuck in a destructive relationship with a guy who was tied to the criminal world and had serious legal troubles. Every time she tried to break free, things took a darker turn. During her final attempt to escape, it escalated into a conflict, a kidnapping, and an attempt on her life. Miraculously, Angel survived, but her current state is far from what most would consider a normal life. Angel Lynn was born on April 18, 2001, in a suburb of the English city of Birmingham, located in the Midlands. She was the fourth of 6 siblings and the youngest of the daughters. Her parents, Patrick, known as Paddy to friends, and Nicolette, Nikki, were just regular folks. Patrick ran a small business in retail, while Nikki devoted herself entirely to caring for the home and raising their sons and daughters. The Lynn family wasn't wealthy, but their modest family business provided a steady income that allowed them to cover their basic needs. They lived in a spacious, cozy home and worked hard to give their sons and daughters a good education, raising them to be respectful and decent people. Angel had a very warm and trusting relationship with her whole family, but she was especially close to her mother, Nicolette. She shared all her secrets with her mom, her plans for the future, her dreams, and her worries. From an early age, Angel was incredibly active, always on the go and full of energy. She did well in school, played sports regularly, and had a ton of friends. People described her as ambitious, determined, and principled. Someone who always stood up for what was right. She dreamed of going to college for law and working in the justice system. She was also known for her striking appearance and slender, model-like figure. With her bright blonde hair and deep blue eyes, she was always the center of attention and could light up any gathering. She had no shortage of admirers, but she rarely went on dates because she simply didn't have the time. Angel valued her independence and was determined to stand on her own 2 feet. So while she was still in high school, she took a part-time job as a waitress at a local fast food restaurant. She carefully saved up for college and bought her own clothes, makeup, and other personal items. After graduating high school, Angel easily got into her dream college. She decided to become a crime scene investigator and enrolled in a program that would help her achieve that goal. She balanced her studies with work and sports, managing to handle it all with seemingly boundless energy. Everything was going well until she crossed paths with a young man named Chay Bowskill, who ended up taking everything from her. Chay Bowskill was born on October 20th, 2000, and was the younger of 2 sons of Charlotte Bowskill. He grew up alongside his older half-brother, Reese Norris. Charlotte raised the boys on her own. Neither of their fathers were in the picture or involved in raising them. Even though Charlotte worked multiple jobs from early morning until late at night to provide for her sons, money was always tight. She also didn't spend much time with them, since she was rarely at home. The boys were basically left to fend for themselves, and their living conditions were far from ideal. From a young age, Chay started showing signs of aggression and acting out in ways that worried people around him. He had sudden outbursts of anger, got into fights constantly, and was always finding trouble. Because of this, he started having run-ins with the law as a teenager. He was arrested more than once, but his mother always stepped in to protect him, seeing her younger son as practically perfect despite his behavior. The older brother wasn't exactly an angel either. He often got into trouble with the police. But Chay managed to surpass Reese and became a full-blown criminal while he was still in school. Charlotte, though, didn't see any problem in his behavior. She didn't think of him as a bad person at all. At just 15 years old, Chay got involved in criminal activity. He started by stealing cars and stripping them for parts. Before long, he joined one of the local gangs, where he quickly earned a reputation and found his place. It's worth noting that he was following in his brother's footsteps, except Reese was less aggressive and better at controlling his anger. Chay had a passion for motorcycles and cars, but he didn't just drive them. He practically flew down the streets. He managed to get his driver's license and, for a while, drove cars for his friends in the gang. But by the time he turned 18, he had his own ride, bought with money he'd made through illegal activities. He often drank and used banned substances, getting behind the wheel in that state. One time, he caused a serious crash that landed him in the hospital after slamming into a utility pole. He lost his driver's license, but that didn't stop him. He kept driving stolen cars and even live-streamed his reckless rides through town. As he became more deeply involved in organized crime, Chay moved on from petty theft and carjackings to more serious offenses like robbery and dealing banned substances. He and his accomplices started stealing luxury cars to order and targeting wealthy individuals. Chay liked to call himself a bad guy, and he was proud of it. Even though he was hauled into police stations more than once, he somehow managed to get away with only minor punishments, or none at all. For all his dangerous behavior and the self-destructive life he led, Chay had a striking look and a magnetic personality. Even as a teenager, he could easily charm just about any girl. And when his illegal ventures began bringing in real money, he would spend it freely to impress whoever caught his eye. Because of his bad temper and tendency toward aggression, Chay never had a real relationship that lasted. He was a manipulator and a bully who had no problem using his fists. He could lure a girl in, but usually his partners would run as soon as they realized what kind of person they were dealing with. But not everyone was lucky enough to get away. In early 2019, Angel met a guy named Steven while hanging out with mutual friends. They were the same age, went to the same university, and found they had a lot in common right away. The chemistry between them was instant, and it didn't take long for their friendship to turn into something more. Soon, they were officially dating. Within just a few weeks, they introduced each other to their families, a sign that they were serious about their relationship. Patty and Nikki were happy with their daughter's choice. Steven was a good guy from a nice family. Steven's parents welcomed Angel with open arms, too. The couple spent a lot of time at each other's homes, and their friends and family would even joke about an upcoming wedding. However, just 6 months into this intense and passionate relationship, the couple suddenly broke up for reasons that are still unclear. The breakup was initiated by Steven, and for Angel, it felt like a devastating blow. Soon after, Steven started dating someone else, and Angel stopped hanging out with their mutual friends to avoid seeing her ex and his new partner. Angel found herself completely alone, without her boyfriend or her friends. Even though her family was there for her, she sank deeper into sadness. Throwing herself into her studies and job didn't help much either. It was during this vulnerable time that fate introduced her to someone who would play a fateful role in her life. Angel and Chay crossed paths by chance, and the young woman's beauty immediately caught the attention of the young criminal. He was the one who approached her, asked what was making her so sad, and offered to take a walk and grab a coffee. Angel clearly needed someone to talk to, and Chay turned out to be a surprisingly attentive and caring listener. They exchanged phone numbers and quickly started talking and meeting up regularly. Chay went out of his way to make a good impression on her. He was supportive and kind, and before she even realized it, Angel found herself falling for him. At the time, she truly believed she'd met a guy who was worth her time and effort. Trying to impress Angel, Chay showered her with expensive gifts and took her out to trendy clubs, restaurants, and concerts. She tried to find out more about what he did for a living, but he was skilled at hiding his illegal activities. One evening, Angel invited him to her parents' house for dinner, but what should have been a quiet family meal turned into a heated argument. Chay's arrogant and cocky behavior didn't sit well with Angel's parents. Nikki spoke to her daughter afterward and shared her concerns about this guy, asking Angel to break things off with him. But Angel, not wanting to upset her mom and dad, said that she and Chay were just friends and promised to see him less. After that, the couple continued to date in secret, never even considering ending things. Chay would book them fancy hotel rooms where they'd spend romantic evenings together. Angel still believed she was with a good guy and had fallen in love with him. Chay was always in contact with his girlfriend. They would call each other dozens of times a day and constantly text. He would always ask where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. Angel, thinking it was just his way of caring for her, would trustingly share everything. But in reality, this was the start of his complete control and manipulation. Within just a couple of months, Chay knew everything about her, where she went, who she hung out with, and even her work and school schedule. He quickly gained her trust and began manipulating her by cutting her off from anyone he didn't like. On top of that, he pushed Angel to lie to her parents, slowly building a wall between her and her family. From there, the control only intensified. By August 2019, Chay had so much power over his victim that he was dictating what she should wear, who she could talk to, and he even banned her from wearing makeup. He went through her phone himself, deleting and blocking anyone he didn't approve of. Chay kept a constant eye on her, interrogating her if she went anywhere unexpected. If she stayed out more than half an hour longer than usual, he'd show up to pick her up. It got to the point where Angel couldn't even say hello to a male acquaintance on the street without it turning into a full-blown argument. Her parents began to notice the changes, too. Angel, once bright and full of life, turned into a pale and withdrawn shell of herself. She stopped using makeup, wore baggy clothes, and was always on edge. She became secretive, constantly clutching her phone and rushing off to be alone whenever it rang. She stopped having open conversations with her mother and sisters, which seemed really suspicious to them. Whenever anyone asked how she was doing, she insisted everything was fine and there was no reason to worry, but her words sounded less convincing each time. The gap between Angel and her family grew wider and wider. Chay wanted Angel all to himself. He turned this vibrant, beautiful young woman into someone invisible and isolated, someone who felt she didn't matter to anyone but him. He started controlling every single aspect of her life. He even tried to convince her to quit school and work altogether, promising he'd take care of everything. But Angel couldn't bring herself to give up on her dreams. Chay's grip only tightened. He got access to her social media accounts, installed a tracking app on her phone, and monitored her every move and conversation. He could show up anywhere she went, at any time. It left her feeling constantly on edge, acting nervous and always looking over her shoulder. Under his pressure, Angel got a tattoo of his name on her arm. It was like he'd marked her as his property, and he treated her that way too. Chay would call her dozens of times a day, even in the middle of the night, demanding that she turn on her camera so he could see where she was and who she was with. Angel was at her breaking point and tried several times to end the relationship. But Chay wouldn't let her go. What had started as romance had turned into pure manipulation. Chay was basically stalking Angel, controlling every move she made, pressuring her and cutting her off from everything she cared about, all under the guise of love and care. In January 2020, Chay and a few of his friends were arrested while trying to steal a car. He was sentenced to 4 months in prison. For Angel, it felt like a chance to finally breathe. She thought she was free from this toxic relationship that was going nowhere. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Every day, Chay was allowed a phone call, and each evening he used it to call the Lin family's home line to check up on where Angel was. On top of that, his friends who were still on the outside were watching her for him and reporting back. Angel could feel this constant surveillance, but there was nothing she could do except live in fear. Toward the end of May, Chay was released from prison. The first thing he did was head straight to Angel's house, where he caused a huge scene. When Angel tried to break up with him again, he demanded that she repay several hundred British pounds he claimed he'd spent on her before he went to prison. Even though Angel gave him the full amount from her savings right away, the harassment didn't stop. If anything, Chay became even more aggressive. A week after getting out, he physically attacked Angel for the first time. Just 1 week later, when Chay went after her again, a bystander saw it and called the police, scared for Angel's life. But she refused to press charges, so Chay was released without any consequences. On July 9th, 2020, a neighbor of Chay's called the police, saying he could hear a woman screaming for help. This time, Chay had forced Angel to the ground and slammed her head against the floor. Angel didn't file a complaint even though she needed medical attention afterward. For the next few months, Angel faced ongoing psychological and physical aggression. She didn't dare tell anyone what was happening, scared that Chay might hurt not only her, but also someone in her family. She stayed quiet and just tried to endure, even though she knew deep down that this couldn't go on forever. In September of that year, Angel decided she had to end things for good and walk away from the relationship. Chay's response was to attack her so violently that she was left with scrapes and huge bruises on her face. Afterward, he seemed to calm down, even apologizing and promising to try and be more respectful from then on. Angel knew he wouldn't change and pushed to break up completely. She was sure things weren't over yet, and that the hardest, most dangerous part was still to come, but she was ready to take that risk. Chay, after trying a few more times to win her back, suggested they at least remain friends. Angel agreed, hoping that if he thought they were still on good terms, he'd lose interest and leave her alone. On September 17th, 2020, Angel went to work and later promised to pick up Chay and his friend Rocco Sansom in their van. The two of them often used her as their personal driver, especially when they were too drunk or under the influence of banned substances to drive themselves. That day was no different. Angel arrived at the agreed-upon parking lot where the van was waiting, and Chay and Rocco were standing nearby. Once everyone was in the van, they pulled out onto the road. At some point, Angel and Chay got into an argument. She pulled over to the side of the road, stopped the vehicle, and jumped out of the driver's seat, running away as fast as she could. That moment was caught by street surveillance cameras. In the footage, you can clearly see Chay, looking furious, chasing after her. He grabs her and forces her back into the van, then climbs behind the wheel himself. The vehicle pulled back onto the road and started speeding, completely ignoring traffic laws. What happened was essentially a kidnapping. Angel was literally trapped inside the van between the two guys. She was obviously terrified, and no one really knows what she went through in those moments. Over the next 15 minutes, the police received dozens of calls about a suspicious van barreling down the highway out of town, with the driver acting erratically. But officers didn't have time to respond before tragedy struck. Suddenly, the passenger door of the van swung open, and Angel fell out at full speed, nearly getting hit by two cars that were right behind them. Thankfully, the drivers were quick to react and slammed on their brakes. They rushed to her side, trying to help, and someone called the police. The van drove on for about 100 yards as if nothing had happened, then slowed down and turned back around to the scene. To anyone watching, it might have looked like the driver had dropped something small and, after thinking it over, decided to come back for it. Chay acted calm as he approached, telling the people gathered there that the injured young woman was his girlfriend and they'd just had a fight. He claimed he'd told her he wanted to break up and she'd lost control and tried to end her life by jumping out of the moving van. But his story didn't sound very convincing. He stuck around, waiting for the medics and the police to show up, repeating the same story word for word. It was clear he was sure Angel wouldn't survive, and so he was trying to shift all the blame onto her. His friend Rocco, who was also in the van, backed him up, echoing every word. Despite her severe injuries, Angel was still breathing. She was rushed to the nearest hospital in an ambulance, but the odds of saving her were slim. She had broken ribs and limbs, a compression fracture in her spine, and cuts and bruises all over her body. But the most serious injury was the traumatic brain injury that caused massive bleeding in her brain. For days, doctors fought desperately to save her life. She underwent several extremely complex surgeries, including removing part of her skull to relieve the pressure on her brain. Her heart stopped multiple times. She was clinically dead, and each time the doctors managed to bring her back. Eventually, she was placed in a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support. The chances of Angel ever waking up were almost zero. The doctors were amazed she hadn't died at the scene, but their prognosis was grim. They warned the Lin family that even if, by some miracle, she did survive and could breathe on her own, she would be left not just bedridden, but in a permanent vegetative state. They even suggested taking her off the expensive life support machines, but her parents refused to even consider it. Chay and his friend were detained at the scene and taken to the station for questioning. Both of them denied any wrongdoing and claimed that Angel had been acting out of control, saying the incident was the result of her trying to end her life. However, footage from security cameras painted a very different picture. Chay was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and causing serious physical harm. His friend was arrested as an accomplice, and both were kept in jail while they waited for their court dates. The trial finally began in January 2022, and additional charges were added for assault and harassment. Neither of the defendants admitted guilt, and prosecutors couldn't present clear evidence proving that Angel was thrown from the moving van on purpose. Because of this, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision, so the criminals ended up getting relatively light sentences. Rocco was sentenced to only 2 years for his role in the incident, while Chay was sentenced to 7 years. But in March, even this already lenient sentence was challenged. Chay's lawyer argued that the punishment was too harsh, claiming Chay had no previous convictions for aggressive crimes and pushing for a reduced sentence. Thankfully, the appeal was denied, and the prosecutor's request to increase the sentence from 7 to 12 years was granted. However, Chay was still given the possibility of parole after serving 6 years. Despite the doctor's grim predictions, Angel continued to fight for her life. Even though she suffered serious brain damage, she eventually started breathing on her own, and after a few months, doctors brought her out of the medically induced coma. At first, she didn't recognize anyone, couldn't control her movements, and had to be fed through a tube. There were no signs that she was aware of what was going on. In the spring of 2022, her parents took her home so they could care for her themselves. A year later, in May 2023, Angel surprised everyone again by starting to respond to her surroundings. Then, just a month later, she looked at her mom, Nikki, and said, "Mom." Now, Angel Lin is undergoing a long rehabilitation process and has even started taking her first steps. Doctors are not giving her any real chance of returning to her old life, but her parents refuse to accept that because their daughter has already proven more than once that she's a fighter. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.